Welcome in. Today we have Ryan Miller. This is not Jeremy Miller. This is Ryan Miller. If you have not heard of him, he is qualified for the Olympic time trials in 2016 and 2020. Today I wanted to talk to him about that journey. He's also into ultra running and is a coach. I want to talk to him about all of these things. He lives in my neck of the woods in San Antonio. He is a literal local legend. Anywhere he runs, automatically on Strava, he is recognized as a local legend because of his legendary running performance. So, Ryan, how are you doing today, man?
Man, great, Andrew. Appreciate you having me on.
All right. Well, like I just said, I'm excited to talk to you about this. Now, I first heard about you because a coach locally that I worked with, Hernan, had made mention of you, and he said that, oh yeah, there's a great running coach in town. This Maverick running group, a guy named Ryan Miller ran a 2:12, and I was like, what, 2:12? Then I looked it up. It was a 2:14. Impressive nonetheless. And so I was like, well, I have to know this story. I have to know what it's like. Why is he in San Antonio and not running the mountains of Arizona or Kenya? So I guess, what marathon did you run to qualify for the 2016 Olympic trials?
So I actually did not run a marathon to qualify for the 2016 trials, because you can qualify for these races via the half marathon as well. But usually the half marathon standard is a lot more difficult. So, from an equivalency perspective, I think the last United States Olympic Marathon trials for 2024, you had to run under an hour and 3 minutes and a half, which if you can do that, you're probably the equivalent of a 2:10 to 2:12 marathoner, versus if you want to qualify running the marathon, it took under 2:18 in the marathon to qualify. So for my first go round in 2016, I graduated from Texas A&M University in spring of 2015. And so I only had 6 months before the Olympic marathon trials, and I knew that was kind of like my dream to qualify for that. So I set my sights on it, and I knew I probably had 2 good shots at a half marathon leading into it. And I was so young at the time, just 23 years old, that I didn't necessarily envision just going straight to the marathon immediately after graduating college. I wanted to do some 5K, 10K half marathon on the roads. So I went to Rock and Roll San Jose out in California, which I know you said you were living out there. Very fun race. And I took a shot at qualifying, and I didn't qualify. I ran 1:08 in the half marathon, which is pretty solid for a first one. I think that's 5:10 per mile or something like that. And I have this visceral memory of, it was mile 2, and I turned to my left, and I was running next to Meb Keflezighi, who, if you're aware of him, he has won the Boston Marathon, Olympic medalist. And I was like, oh, I'm going pretty fast right now if I'm running next to Meb Keflezighi at the front of this half marathon race. And ultimately, I think he beat me by 6 minutes or something like that. But I came back, I took another shot at it in January of 2016 and hit my qualifying time. I ran 1:04:35 in Jacksonville, Florida, at the Jacksonville Bank Half Marathon. And it was the literal last weekend you could qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. So that was my quick journey to 2016.
Hot out the gate. I do send my condolences for the UT A&M game. I did go to the University of Texas.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah,
I like
for a
it.
couple of years, film school. And all my friends growing up were Aggies, so I caught a lot of shit in the 90s, So you're like, I was younger then, you're old now. So I guess for context, how old are you now?
I'm 33 now. Just turned 33 in November.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't look a day over 28. So
Oh, thanks.
yeah, no, it's the hair. So, all right. So then how did you qualified for the 2016 Olympic trials? How did that pan out?
Man, I wish it would have panned out better. I didn't even make it to the starting line, unfortunately. So I had an emergency appendectomy the week of the Olympic trials. So it was about 8 or 9 days before the race. Training had been going really well. I was really excited to make my marathon debut in Los Angeles at the Olympic marathon trials, and felt really ready to just take a big swing at it. And all of a sudden, my stomach just started hurting, and I thought nothing of it. We all have stomach pains from eating, Little Caesars hot and ready every once in a while. So I was like, this will pass, whatever. Took some Pepto-Bismol, went to bed. Next day, feels a little worse. I'm like, oh, man, I might have a stomach virus or something. But I power through it, go to work, get my runs in, all good. And it just got worse and worse and worse. And after like 4 or 5 days, I literally felt like someone like stuck a knife in me and was like twisting the knife in my stomach. So I was like, oh, I'm flying out in like 36 hours for the Olympic trials. I better go get this checked out. So I went to the emergency room and they ran some tests and they're like, hey, we're taking you into surgery in like 1 hour. Your appendix is literally about to rupture, which, you know, I kind of knew at that point if they're going to like be opening me up and removing an internal organ, I probably wasn't going to run the Olympic trials 3 days later. So, you know, shed a few tears, went under the knife. They took my appendix out, and I watched the Olympic trials from a hospital bed a few days later.
Oh, man, that had to be hard. How did you, or I guess before we get into how you rebounded from that, when you got out of college, so now you have no college coach, who did you find a coach? Did a coach approach you, or who did you work with?
Yeah, so I was living in Houston, Texas after college. I went to go work in the oil and gas industry down there. I have a degree in industrial distribution from Texas A&M University, which is like a hybrid engineering business degree. So I was doing like supply chain management work in oil and gas. And the place I was living, the Woodlands, which is a suburb of Houston, they had like a running group called Team Green, and they had a coach, Dan Green, who used to coach at the highest school there. So, you know, just being local, I just joined up with them, and they had a couple other guys who were also trying to qualify or had already qualified for the Olympic marathon trials. And it was a good fit while I was down there in Houston for the first bit.
From 2016, then, like, knowing that you missed it, how did you rebound it? What was your plan or strategy for the next go around 4 years later?
Yeah, I mean, to qualify for your dream race, number one, so quickly is kind of surreal. It's like you don't even know how to process it, especially when it happens like a month beforehand, and then all of a sudden gets ripped away from you just a few weeks later. It was just like a whirlwind of emotions at that time. But also 23 years old, right? Like I knew I had another few go rounds at it to qualify and get to the starting line, and you know I was pretty dead set on like, hey, next 4 years, like I'm going to put everything I have into being the best half marathoner and marathoner I could be on the roads. I just set my foot forward, just like I did in college and high school. Of, you know, in those days I went from like being a JV runner my first few years of high school to making varsity in college. I didn't even run a track meet for Texas A&M my first 2 years because I wasn't good enough for them to deem me fit to put on the uniform, and it took until my junior year to actually run a race. And I took that same mentality into running on the roads, at least at an elite level, right? I could go run races, but running and being good enough to qualify for the Olympic trials or compete in the elite fields of bigger races across the U.S., I knew it might take a couple of years to build into it. And I had that long-term vision of like, I just want continual improvement and to keep putting my best foot forward consistently. And I knew that would eventually get me there if I worked hard enough at it.
So you said you kind of came up through high school and like came up through college and earned a spot. So when you ran that half marathon in 104, were you running above your level where you had you matured into that speed?
I mean, it was definitely a breakthrough performance for me. I think we've all had that if you're a runner for any length of time. I mean, very rarely do we see someone, oh, they just improved like a few seconds every single time they ran a 5K indefinitely for years. Like, no, usually like you plateau for a bit, you take a step back, you take a step forward, and then a lot of us have like a big breakthrough day. And it's usually months or years in the making, but it feels like on that day you've kind of stepped up to the next level. And that was definitely how it felt for me at the Jacksonville Bank half marathon when I ran 104.35. Because compared to the times I ran in college, so in college I was like 4:10 in the mile, 14:30 for 5K, 29:50 for 10K. Those were good, but 104.30 in the half marathon is equivalent more to like 28:50 for 10K or 13:55 for 5K. It was like, that's a very big leap forward at that level. I knew that if I could make it that leap in the half marathon, just my second go of it, who knows what's possible in the half and the full marathon in the future too.
Sweet. And so the strategy or the approach to the 2020 Olympic trials, did you decide to go for the half again, or did you go for full?
Both. I mean, I would qualify whatever way I could get in. And it was still, they lowered the half marathon qualifying standard from 2016 to 2020. They lowered it from 105 to 104, which doesn't sound like a lot. It's 1 minute, right? But at that level, knocking another 5 seconds per mile off your pace is actually quite difficult. But inevitably, I did qualify in both the I hit a 1:03:45 in the half and a 2:14:30 in the marathon in the next qualifying period. So check both of those boxes.
Just to be sure, just to make sure everyone knows.
I mean, am I registered? I don't know. Let me just do it again. Yeah. But the crazy part was I missed it twice. So my first marathon debut, I went to Grandma's Marathon in 2018, and I go to basically every race I do, ultras now, road races back then. Like, I kind of just take home run swings and go for the big one. And so at my first marathon, I was like, I'm going for it. I was on 2:17 pace through mile 20 in my first marathon. Inevitably had like not like a crazy fade, but I slowed down 30 seconds per mile the last 10K, like a lot of us do. I ran 2:19:17, which is only 17 seconds off of the qualifying time. So just, that's like half a second per mile, right? Just so like the margins are so fine. And then my next race, I went to the Indianapolis half marathon and I ran 1:04:06, and the qualifying time was 1:04. So I missed it by 6 seconds in my next go round. I mean, at that point I knew like it's kind of inevitable. I'm right there. I don't even need a big leap forward at this point, just like a small marginal gain, a good race to break through. And it happened in my next two races. But it was fun, and heartbreaking a little bit, but also like, man, I'm right there. I'm ready to do this again.
Sweet. And so what was the difference between the 2:19:17 and the 2:14 race? Like, was it just like we got good weather? It was a better course. I mean, Grandma's is a really good course, but like what were the differences?
Well, I think twofold. I started working with a new coach. His name is Terry Howell, and he lives in Santa Barbara, California. Great coach. He was at, I want to say UC Santa Barbara, but I think I might be mistaken there. I think there's another college down there he coached at previously, but now he works as just like, he works in the nutrition supplement industry, but coaches on the side, and had a lot of athletes who, like my previous coach, had qualified or were trying to qualify for Olympic trials. So teamed up with him, got connected through my sponsor at the time, Rabbit, who makes like clothing. So that was a big change, and he really upped my game as far as like I was running higher volume, doing more quality, just had a lot more structure than I had. I was self-coached for a couple years before I joined on with him. And then also I moved back to San Antonio at that time. So I was living in Midland, Texas for a year, and that was awful. I hated living in Midland, Texas. I did it for my job, to move out there and take a career growth opportunity, and it was not a life growth opportunity, especially as it relates to running. So I was probably running 50 to 60 miles per week, no specific quality work leading to Grandma's Marathon, just like I'd go run like 5:30 pace for like 18 miles for a long run or something, just hammering, running like moderate to easy all the time.
No big deal.
I mean, at the time, I'd been doing that for a few years at that point. It was kind of just like, that was like, if I just was going through the motions, I would just go do a hard long run and just run like moderately. Like, what didn't kill me, but it was definitely not easy. And that got me to that 2:19, which I guess was good. But there was definitely another level up I could take with Terry. But yeah, and then moving back to San Antonio, I was happier. I had better places to run, generally better weather. I had a more consistent job when I moved down here. So I was working for USA, which is like, I was doing some banking, supply chain management work for them. And it was much more consistent than working in the oil field. So all those things over a 6-month period really led to that jump from 2:19 to 2:14.
That's awesome. What marathon did you run a 2:14 at, and how were you feeling throughout the race? Did you feel good? Did you know you had it in the bag, or was it a roller coaster?
I did it at the California International Marathon, or as a lot of people call it, CIM, and it doubled that year as the USATF Marathon Championship. So it drew a much bigger, like, elite competitive field there. And I had run that one I mentioned earlier, the 1:04:06 half marathon. I ran that a month before CIM, which really indicated to me and my coach Terry Howell at the time that I was probably in like 2:13 to 2:14 shape if the marathon struck right. So that's what I went out at. I went out, and I think the first half I was with the peloton, as you might say, the pack of the USATF Championship in 1:06:15, which is 2:13:30 pace, and then had a minor fade, like again a lot of us do in the marathon, to 2:14:30, primarily in the last like 4 miles or so. But probably the craziest part of that race was I had to poop the whole time. Like I think we've all had those races. You dread them. But like from mile 2 onwards, I was like, oh my God, I got to stop and poop. And I held it in until like mile like 17. And I was with the lead pack and I saw some porta potties ahead, like 2 of them. And I was like, this is my chance. I'm about to poop my pants. I'm not going to be the marathoner who has like poop running down their leg, like not even to qualify for the Olympic trials. Like I'm going to go poop in a toilet. So I actually took off like sprinting ahead of the pack. And I'm sure a lot of the guys probably looked around like, what is this guy doing? I was running like, 5 flat pace at that time. And I took off for like 4:30 pace at mile 17. And I just turned right, booked it right into the porta potty. I hope to God that no one was in there or it was locked. But I probably had like a 15-second poop. I didn't even wipe. I came out, my pants probably aren't even halfway up. My butt's hanging out, but I yanked my pants up. And my next mile split, I ran a 4:45 mile 18 to catch back up to the lead pack. Probably why I had that minor fade at the end, to be honest, was I had to like accelerate shortly before I started that fade at the end. And then I still had to shit the rest of the rest of the race still. It's just one of those days where your stomach's not cooperating.
That's amazing. You should definitely have an asterisk for your 2:14. Took a shit at mile 17, and then that's amazing. That much more impressive. Okay, so then you qualified for the 2020 Olympic trials. Then I know it's a couple years later, but how did that go?
Yeah, wish it would have gone better. I made it to the starting line this time, and I was seated like 40th, I think. Which in the big picture, if you're somebody who's looking at a Olympic trials qualifying race, unbiased, it takes top 3 to make it on the Olympic team. If you're seated 40th, you don't have a chance. Nobody in the history of marathoning has ever made the Olympic team for the U.S. in a trials qualifying race seated less than like 15th or 20th, essentially. History be damned, I was going to take my shot at it. So I ran with the lead pack as long as I could. And it was a fast race, very hilly, very windy, basically running like 2:10 pace from the gun, which would be a PR on like a hard course for me. And ultimately, I succumbed to like severe hamstring cramps. I started having cramps around like mile 16 when I dropped off the lead pack. And then by mile 20, I was probably running like 7:30 pace. Like one of those like true like crater, everything's on fire. Like I'm like seizing up on the road. So ultimately, I ended up stopping at mile 20. I probably could have finished, like jogged it in, but I mentally, I think my day was through once like kind of the dream became unraveled at that point. Which again, like I think there's a lot of courage to be had for taking a shot at your dreams. Also, there's a lot of courage to pushing through to the finish. I think sometimes I look back and there's just these races, I'm like, man, like, could I have finished it? Because I have quite a few DNFs on my record now. But also when you start competing at the really high elite level and you're shooting for a particular result, once that result is gone, I think it's really, really hard to maintain that motivation. Or even thinking about like, I could sign up for another race a couple months from now, or I could like severely strain my hamstring and be out for multiple weeks after this. So there's a lot of thoughts that go through your head after you've had a DNF on a big stage like that.
Yeah, I think it's understandable. Really, it's like you said before, it's like, this is your one shot. Like if I was Zach Panning in the last one, like
exactly.
Go for it. You know what I mean? Just see how long you can hold it. Like, who knows? Because usually that's not the recommended race strategy anyway.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even pace it, but you never know when you're going to have a breakthrough performance or not, and after the 2020 Olympic trials, I know there is a transition into the ultra scene. How did that happen?
It was interesting because literally after the Olympic trials in 2020 was when the pandemic set in. It was like the next week. Yeah, like all the major sports leagues are shutting down. Everyone's being sent home from work. Like it was pure chaos, as we all remember. So there was no races really happening at that point. So I'm just out there running. I always enjoyed trail running and knew I wanted to give a shot at like ultra trail running. And because no races were happening, I was like, well, this might be a time to have a good training period to transition and actually specifically prepare for some ultra trail races coming up. And I could still do that for a couple years, then shift back to the roads and go for the Olympic marathon trials again. But ultimately, this seems like a good opportunity, and maybe the world is saying it's time for a reset. So that's what I did. I parted ways with Terry, my coach Terry, who was fantastic, like nothing negative about it at all. I just wanted to work with somebody who had a little bit more experience in that realm. So I picked up David Roche as my coach at that time in spring 2020 and set my sights on the Bandera 100K as my first ultra marathon.
I have so many questions. So I guess the first one, David Roche has been getting a lot of eyes ever since he set the course record at the Leadville 100, and then also I saw him on the Strength Running podcast, and I saw him on Rich Roll, and I went down that rabbit hole, and I'm doing hill sprints now. So the first question is, what's it like working with David Roche as a coach?
Yeah, it's incredible. I'm glad I got to know him before. I mean, he was like relatively well known in the small circles of ultra trail running. Even when I picked him up as a coach, he'd already had some coached athletes to winning Western states and some of the biggest races across the world. And he'd even been on multiple like U.S. national teams in the sub ultra space. So going to world championships in that regard for the U.S. But he hadn't had like the huge breakthroughs like Leadville and Javelina recently, and exploding in mainstream popularity, you might say, that he's had in 2024. But he's still the same guy. I mean, he's like, everything you see on his podcast and see from him publicly now was how he was like when, you know, I started working with him in 2020 and beyond. And he's held a lot of the same principles. Like, things have evolved as like his coaching knowledge and experience and really like diving into the science has evolved. For example, like now he advocates for like uphill treadmill workouts and doubles and things like that. I don't think I didn't talk with him about that, but like for the first couple of years when he was coaching me, but it was something that came out of it. Or the fueling revolution. I remember he was very impressed that when I did the Bandera 100K, I think I averaged like 80 grams of carbohydrates per hour. So I was doing one Morton 320 drink mix every hour. And that was like incredible, even just 4 years ago. And now he's talking about taking 150 grams of carbohydrates per hour, like double what I did to win the Bandera 100K. So it's wild. But ultimately, to answer your question, yeah, it's amazing working with him and having that personal relationship with him.
Sweet. And then returning back to the Bandera 100K, what was that experience like? Was it a very deep field? Usually the questions surrounding ultras is like, did you reach a breaking point where you like quit, or did you feel pretty confident all the way through it?
Yeah, I mean, your first one, you don't know what to expect. I think the longest run I'd ever done before that first ultra was a marathon. And so when I hit the marathon mark at the Bandera 100K, I wasn't even halfway through the race. I think that was the biggest mental and emotional hurdle to overcome, was probably that like marathon to 50K point. It's like, I'm not even halfway through, and I don't feel amazing right now. Not terrible. I'm still moving forward, but I've got a lot more running to do. But then once you hit the halfway point, 50K, and I know once I hit it, like things started turning a little bit. I felt the same, like gradually getting worse and worse, but I was halfway through the race. You know, it was like, I can keep pushing. I can keep going. My body's not falling apart. Some minor hamstring cramping is going on. But then the motivation continued to tick up as the race went along. And I took the lead around mile like 20, and then I never saw anybody the rest of the race that day. Even though I think I built a lead of like 10 minutes and eventually won by only 4 minutes. So there was one guy catching me a little bit at the end. I didn't know what to expect. So I went deep into the recesses of my mind and heart, to get that one done. Especially, I feel like mile 50 and beyond, it was just like a state of like, when will this be over? Please put me out of my misery.
Yeah, I haven't touched the ultra. Not sure I have much interest in it. I think I saw Courtney Dauwalter in some interview talking about having conversations with her hallucinations, and I was like, none of that. Sounds like a good time. So what do you prefer? Do you prefer ultras over road racing, or are they just two different things? You enjoy both, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, two different things for sure. Because I've still stepped up and done like some like local 5Ks, turkey trots over the last few years, even as I've been, and half marathons. I've done a couple of road races as I've been in the ultra scene, and they're really fun. I enjoy it. I think one of the things I like the most about ultras is just how multifaceted it is. So yes, like your fitness is probably the biggest determinant of your ability to be successful in an ultra, 100K, 100 miles, 50K, whatever. Like, how fast are you? Where's your aerobic and lactate threshold? Just your baseline running ability. But then how do you train fatigue resistance? So to be able to use that fitness for as long as possible. How do you prepare the musculoskeletal neuromuscular system to handle the pounding and the consistent movement for that long? How do you fuel for that long? Stay hydrated. How do you contend with like vastly different courses and conditions out there? It's just, I'm still very intrigued by how many variables you have to consider and prepare for and master. Because I think it favors the people who can over prepare and think about all these things and implement that in their training.
And now transitioning over to coaching, you've had many different coaches over the years, including David Roche. And so now you yourself are a coach. So Hernan told me, my coach, local coach at the time, hey, there's this guy who's really fast. He has a group here, the Maverick Running Community. So he's a coach. So let's transition to coaching. What is your philosophy on coaching? What principles do you adhere? Do you pull a little bit from every coach?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I think if anybody told you like, oh no, it's all me, I've thought through all of this, done all of the research myself, like this is my philosophy, they'd be lying to you. We all build upon what has previously been taught to us, our own experiences, what we've read about. So, even if I said, oh yeah, I adhere to the David Roche SWAP philosophy, well, David has also learned a lot from the likes of Arthur Lydiard and some of the other great coaches that have come before in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. No matter who I say or what I say, like it harkens back to the history of running. The philosophy of coaching as it relates to, the body and mind has evolved over time. But for me, for sure, David Roche, especially, coaching trail and ultra athletes has been the biggest influence for me and what I've learned from him and listen to him and Megan Roche talk about both personally one-on-one with them and then also through their podcast about what it takes to train for and be successful in trail and ultra running. And then, on the road scene, Renata Canova, the Norwegian athletes and coaches, I think a lot of them, I've just come back to that, like, however strong your aerobic system is, that's the primary determinant of how fast you're going to be on the roads and really like marathon and sub-marathon. And there's elements of ultra running I've even brought into it too, right? Part of the fueling revolution in the ultra and trail running scene, I've really imparted that wisdom upon my road athletes that I coach in the marathon, and that's really helped them a lot. So as an example, one of my core philosophies is I love including like quality work within the long run, no matter what we're training for. So 4 by 10 minutes moderate, 10 by 2 minutes at 10K effort with a 4-minute jog recovery. I'm just throwing out some example like workouts I might throw in for someone doing like 12 to 20 miles for a long run. But we now have very specific long runs where we have it's a fueling practice day. The effort is easy, maybe building to moderate if you feel good, but the primary purpose of the day is to train the stomach to be able to handle and tolerate more carbohydrates and sometimes more fluids and electrolytes if the demands of the upcoming race really dictate that. So I know I just spun off a little bit. You asked me about coaching philosophy and where do I find inspiration and derive it from. The coaches of past yonder and the many generations of athletes and coaches who I've had the pleasure to, share the roads and trails with.
Sweet. No, that's exactly what I was looking for is oh, hey, well, we try to train the gut. We're going high carb, quality work, inside the long run, things like that. So of your runners, do you work with a wide variety? You have like some schoolers, you've got some like marathon road runners, some ultra, like how does the breakdown work for you?
Man, yeah, it's actually pretty evenly divided at this point. It's probably like 50 focus on ultra and trail, probably driven by like my recent stuff with that. I think that like draws people's eyes and they might want to talk to me about it. But then the road, there's a lot more people who do marathons and half marathons on the roads. So it's probably 50-50 between those. And I do mentor a select amount of like high school athletes as well. And I use that word mentor specifically as opposed to coach because they have a coach at school. All of them do. So my philosophy with like high school athletes is I'll give them training to supplement what their coach might be doing long runs, doing strength work if their coach doesn't like advocate for or include that. But ultimately their coach is the one doing the coaching. I just want to be there to help shape their like overall philosophy or their overall relationship with running, and then the small aspects around it, like the mentality of racing, how to fuel around runs, things like that, that especially newer runners and high school athletes, like you see some of them at the concession stand eating nachos before they're 1600 on the track. And it's like, dude, we got to talk. We're not going to do that anymore.
Awesome. And so when you have an intake process and you take a new runner, right? I guess a couple questions. The first one would be, what's the number one area of opportunity that you see from a lot of midlife runners or runners that come to you for coaching?
Man, I love that question. The number one thing, because everybody's different. Everybody brings vastly different amounts of experience. Like I've had some athletes I've taken on that they've done over 100 marathons. And it's like, my gosh, like what other barrels, scraping the bottom of the barrel, what can we do to help you continue to improve from all that experience you've had? Some that have done none, some that just started running recently. I'll tell you this though, that the number one thing that I always want to make sure that I talk over with somebody when I first talk to them is like, what are your goals? Like, what do you want to accomplish, right? And then working backwards from there. So the demands of the goals, whether that's the race or something more process oriented, like how can we actually get you there, and what's the time frame that we want to do it from? So I start to kind of work backwards from like what they want to accomplish. I always ask everybody in like short term, like over the next year, what do you want to do? And then what over the next like 3 to 5 years, then what's like a lifelong dream that you want to accomplish, and trying to keep all three of those in mind, where yes, we're focused on maybe for a lot of folks, getting a Boston qualifying marathon time in the year time frame, maybe up to 3 to 5 years if they're a little bit farther away from it. But, over their lifetime, maybe they want to take a shot at qualifying for Olympic marathon trials or, something like that. And knowing that if that's the long-term vision, what do we have to keep doing to inching our way towards that as well? For a lot of people, I see that it is primarily having consistency. So I would say for like 80% of people, they may not see the results they want to because they haven't been consistent for long enough. Because consistent over 3 to 4 weeks is not enough when it comes to running. Consistent over 4 to 6 months, you're starting to get there. Staying consistent over a period of multiple years is how you're eventually going to get where you want to go and go beyond where you even thought possible. So that's why I try to, that has nothing to do with the X's and O's of training, of me giving them specific workouts or some various like system we're going to work on. It's more of just like, hey, I'm going to be here for you through it all, and I'm going to help you do everything possible to stay happy and healthy while you're running, so that you can be consistent. Because if you're happy and healthy, you're gonna enjoy it, number one, and you're gonna like actually want to go out and run and be healthy enough to do it. So that's probably the lowest hanging fruit, is that consistency piece of it for most folks.
As a coach, with your approach, when you prescribe workouts, are those time-based? I know earlier you were spitting off VDOT calculator transition, like equivalent performances, like you had it almost memorized, or are you very familiar with that? So do you prescribe by pace based off of that, or do you prescribe by time or effort?
Yeah, I'm an effort based guy. So especially you and I live down here in San Antonio, so we're recording this in December right now. Running in December is a lot different than running in July. Just like if you live up in the Northeast, running right now in December when it's icy and it's 20 degrees out is a lot different than running in August when it might be like 55 in the morning. So effort is what's going to dictate that across the board. And what I really want folks to do is like not worry about the data during their run. So don't be looking at heart rate. Don't be looking at pace. Like you can take some quick peeks at it just to get a feel for it, but don't stress yourself out about it. We want to use those things in like our post-run analysis to actually verify, like, were you running at the right effort level, or were you running too hard? Most people, they're running too hard. Not a lot of folks you have to say, hey, you can actually run harder for this. But but actually using that in the like a post-run way to understand like where is the appropriate effort, and then refining that over time as we get more data points about like where they are with their current fitness, what we're working towards, and what they're capable of.
And I guess to kind of wrap it up and close it out, Ryan Miller, as a runner, you're still 10 years, at least 10 years younger than Kipchoge at this point, running into those races. Are you done with the road marathons? Are you still running? Are you committed to the ultra scene? Are you going to be running any ultras soon?
Oh man, maybe breaking news here, but I got this feeling within me that I might be running a marathon in 2025, and there's a brand new one happening in San Antonio called the SATX Marathon coming up. It's not written in stone. I haven't registered or anything, but dude, I mean, it's so cool. The city of San Antonio, for anyone out there listening, we've had the Rock and Roll Marathon. That's been kind of like our big race of the year, first weekend in December every year for the last like 2 decades, essentially. And I'm not privy to what actually happened behind the scenes, but that race will be no more. This was the last year they were doing it. And they've already announced that next year the city of San Antonio, or whatever partners they're going to bring on, are putting on a race that same weekend called the SATX Marathon. That'll be, you know, I guess maybe less corporate, you might call it, than Rock and Roll, a true hometown race. I think that's so cool. And I think I might want to go out and give it a shot and maybe take a chance at winning the first ever SATX Marathon in 2025.
Well, then I guess I'm going to have to scratch my plans of winning the SATX. But no, I saw that recently too, and I'm like 99% positive that I'm going to be. You got to the inaugural SATX marathon.
Yeah.
They haven't picked the course profile. That's where the 1% comes in, because if they go for like 2,000 feet of gain, I'm like, I got nothing going on to December. So yeah, I'm going to be running Boston in April. It's my first one. I got into
amazing.
Boston. Yeah,
nice.
And then I got 3 kids, man. So me and the wife were talking about, it's like, okay, maybe one trip a year, and that'll be Boston. And then I'm reduced to like local races. And Houston qualifies the Woodlands, those kind of places too. But yeah, I'm probably going to do the SATX as well. It's pretty
that would be amazing.
Exciting. Did you ever run the Woodlands when you were up there?
I did. I did the half marathon there twice, and that's a great race they put on every year. Super fast course. Of course, the later you get in spring in Texas, the higher likelihood you have of maybe not the most ideal conditions, which is why the Houston Marathon in January is probably the most pristine race and time of year down here. But yeah, the Woodlands is fantastic.
Yeah, I've done the Woodlands twice. Both. Well, one, I got excited because I ran a half marathon PB of 1:23:58, and I was like, I could run a sub 3 based on that equivalency. It's like in 6 weeks. I'll just send it for the Woodlands and I'll go run. And I failed. I didn't have the endurance. I ran like a 3:05 something. And then the next year in Houston, this last year, I ran a 3:02:24, and I was like, so close. Revenge marathon. I was like, Woodlands. And they always wait the first week of March. The humidity just kind of like comes right in, and it's like, the weather's just not quite right at the Woodlands every year. But I'm done with revenge marathons, I think, too. So
you're gonna have an amazing spring with that.
Hit the reset.
Yeah, in Boston. So, I mean, you said that's your first marathon, right?
Yeah, Boston is. I'm gonna run
your first Boston.
My first Boston. Yeah.
That's
so
right.
I crashed and burned in the San Antonio Rock and Roll in 2021, right after COVID. Coming up that, I had gotten into running in 2020, went down the rabbit hole of low heart rate training, Maffetone, whatever. I had done a little bit of CrossFit, but I didn't run in high school. I didn't run in college. I had no running background. And so when I was training, I was just running all easy. And then the December, it was like very humid. It was like 70 degrees. It was terrible, like another high 60s kind of humid day. I went out at sub 3 pace, and just by mile 11, my body was like, I was so excited. I drank a gallon of cold brew before the race. My heart rate was just like through the roof. So yeah, I jogged like 15 miles for a 409 marathoner. That's my Stephen Scollion claim to fame, 409 marathoner. So
dude, you're tough as nails, Andrew. I always tell people, like, athletes I coach, we all have tough races eventually. If you're in the game long enough, there's going to be a day where it doesn't work out, and that's okay if you take enough shots at it. But ultimately, those tough days, that's what like mentally and emotionally prepares you for the good days too. Because those, as slow time-wise as they are way, way harder to get through than the good days. So I mean, it's just been building upon itself for you, man. And I have no doubt that Boston's going to be a great day for you.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. Yeah, the approach this year is I'm just training mile, 3K, like super fast paces. And then I'm going to run the Austin International half. Have you ever run the Austin 3M?
Yeah, that's
so fun.
Amazing race.
Cheater course, but whatever. It's good. But I'm going to run, but I'm going to do it like, I'm going to run through it. I'm not going to do like a big taper. It's just going to be like a workout for that weekend. Matt Fox does like a 10 to 12 week sort of marathon specific work where 2 workouts go to like 1 workout on Wednesday, and then the long run on the weekend, has marathon pace in it. So there's like, I don't know, 6 to 8 20-miler type runs. Since I feel like I always lose a little bit of the top end speed, I want to like keep that fast end and keep that bounce in the spring and like, the edge.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. It doesn't take a whole lot of the top end speed to maintain it once you've established a good reservoir of it in the base building phase. So I think you'll be in good hands. I mean, even if you're just doing strides twice per week, 1 hills, 1 flat, like you'll be good as long as you put enough of a focus on it before the marathon specific phase.
All right, to wrap it up, where can people find you if they're looking for coaching or otherwise?
Yeah, I'm maverickrunningcommunity.com, or you could email me at ryan.miller.coaching@gmail.com. Is probably the quickest way to get a hold of me. So do that if you want to chat, even if like you just have a question that you want to go over or consult about anything. Like I'm here for you, especially any folks in San Antonio that are listening. Like I just love our local running community down here, but also Instagram at ryanmiller34. At Maverick Running Community, like post quite a bit of stuff, coaching and my own running journey related on there too.
Sweet. And that's Ryan Miller, guys. That's not Jeremy Miller. Okay, leave Jeremy Miller alone.